Hello, you're watching Scotland at 7 on Tuesday, the 19th of July. Thanks for watching us tonight. We're going to bring the programme from that. You can see I'm in my garden office in the south side of Glasgow, and our guest tonight is a member of Scottish Parliament who's also in the south side of Glasgow. It's James Dornan. In fact, we could have met in a cafe up the road, couldn't we, James? But glad to have you on the programme tonight. So what I'm going to do, first of all, James, is I'm going to run through the latest updates from Russia's war in Ukraine, and then we'll go into the main stories. Our top story tonight is on bushfires and heat wave, which is striking most of Europe, and part of it is even striking parts of Scotland. So first of all, we're on day 146 of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, and the European Union is going to add Russia's biggest bank, Sberbank, and the head of the giant zinc and copper firm UMMC to its blacklist of individuals and companies accused of supporting Russia's invasion of Ukraine. A new list of 48 officials and 9 entities is to be blacklisted, prepared by the EU Foreign Affairs Service, and it also includes leaders of the Night Wolves Motorcycle Club, actors, politicians, the deputy head of the Russian Security Service, family members of sanctioned oligarchs, and military personnel. Vladimir Putin and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan will discuss the export of Ukrainian grain at their meeting in Tehran today. Russian forces shelled the town of Toretsk in eastern Ukraine, killing 6 people, according to Ukrainian officials. A 2-story building was destroyed. Rescuers recovered the bodies of 5 dead people in total. 3 people were rescued from the rubble, but one of them died in hospital. Russia has struggled to sustain effective offensive combat power, and the problem is likely to become increasingly acute, according to UK military intelligence. Russia has struggled to sustain effective. Sorry, I've read that one. Sorry. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has appointed a new security official as acting head of the Domestic Security Agency after 2 top officials were fired over claims of failure to counter Russian infiltration. Ukraine has received the bodies of another 45 servicemen in accordance with the norms of the Geneva Convention, according to a statement from the Ministry of Reintegration of the Temporarily Occupied Territories of Ukraine. Russia has claimed to have killed at least 260 members of the Ukrainian forces in the last 24 hours, to have shot down one helicopter and 4 drones. The United States will continue to provide intelligence to Ukraine despite recent changes in Ukrainian President Zelensky's inner circle, a statement from the US State Department said on Monday. Russia's Gazprom told customers in Europe it cannot guarantee gas supplies because of extraordinary circumstances, as they call it. The Russian state gas monopoly said it was declaring force majeure on supplies starting from the 14th of June. Turkey has said that a meeting with Ukraine, Russia and the UN this week to discuss resuming Ukraine's Black Sea grain exports is probable. Ukraine will break diplomatic ties with Belarus if its forces cross the border in support of the Russian invasion, Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said in an interview with Forbes. Foreign ministers from the European Union countries have agreed another €500 million, which is approximately £425 million of EU funding to supply arms to Ukraine, taking the bloc's security support to €2.5 billion since February. The independent Russian TV station Dozhd has begun broadcasting from abroad after being blocked by the Russian government in March in the crackdown of independent media. So that's today's roundup on day 146 of Russia's attack on Ukraine. Now, our top story today is about the heat wave which is sweeping Europe and parts of southern Great Britain. Several towns and cities in France have recorded their highest ever temperatures as nearly 2,000 firefighters continue to battle huge blazes in the southwest and the searing heat wave gripping much of Western Europe as it moved north and east. Nantes, near the Atlantic coast, recorded 42 degrees centigrade on Monday, beating the previous high of 40.3, which was set in 1949. Nighttime temperature records were also set, including in La Hague, in Normandy, where 32.8 centigrade was recorded at 3 a.m. on Tuesday. Records were expected to be smashed early again today, meteorologists said, as a mass of hot air, the second to engulf large parts of the continent in recent weeks, moved north and east into eastern France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Germany. The Dutch Weather Service said that temperatures could top 38 centigrade on Tuesday, issuing a code orange extreme weather warning of risk to life in the centre and the south of the country, while officials in Belgium warned of 40 centigrade plus temperatures. The UK record was broken at Heathrow Airport to the west of London, where temperatures reached 40.2 centigrade at lunchtime today, Tuesday. As the European Commission announced that drought warnings were in place, 46% of the bloc's territory and 11% at alert level wildfires in France, Spain, and Portugal continued to ravage the bone dry forest and heathland. The worst of the fires were in southwest France in the Gironde department near Bordeaux, where firefighters were struggling to contain the 2-week-old blaze at La Teste du Bouc and Landiras, and a third at Vonsac, which broke out on Monday night. A total of 19,000 hectares of mainly pine forest have been burned, and 37,000 people have been evacuated from the region. Police said a man was arrested on Monday in an investigation into the Landiras blaze, which has burned nearly 13,000 hectares of land. No deaths have so far been reported in France. In Spain, a fire burning in the northwestern province of Zamora claimed the life of a 69-year-old shepherd after a firefighter died in the same area on Sunday. Later on Monday, an office worker in his 50s was reported to have died from heat stroke in Madrid. The country's Carlos III Health Institute has reported more than 510 heat-related deaths. Near the town of Tabará, a wildfire raced across a field, engulfing an excavator and forcing the driver, who had been trying to dig a firebreak, to run for his life as flames burned clothes off his back. He was airlifted to hospital. Spanish authorities have reported about 20 wildfires still raging from the south to Galicia and the far northwest, where blazes have destroyed about 4,500 hectares of land. While in Portugal, 1,000 firefighters were battling 10 wildfires in the north. Portugal's death toll from the fires doubled to 4 on Monday after a car careered off the road while trying to escape a fire zone near Villarreal in the north, officials said. 60 people have also been wounded in more than a week of fires across the country. Climate experts described the record as a harbinger of rising risks to lives and livelihoods for at least the next 30 years. So, James, thank you for waiting as I read through all that litany of really serious problems caused by the heat wave. Now, is this just one of those things, one of those unusual weather events you get every 100 years? Can you see this as a part of a new pattern?
Yeah, I think it's just one of those things that we're going to have to get used to be quite honest with you. I mean, we've not taken it seriously enough for long enough. I think that we're going to have to, we can't now be playing at the edges with it. I think there's going to have to be some serious decisions made by serious governments. Unfortunately, from what I saw from Boris Johnson today, he's saying kids should continue to go to school, act as if it's like the pandemic all over again, act as if nothing's going wrong and life should be as normal as possible. There has to be hard decisions taken from every government across the world if we're going to not see this. My brother lives in Lisbon, and this is not the first year that they've had to put up with these fires just outside the capital. And it's going to be something that's quite clear now. It's coming to the southeast of England and other parts of England and work its way up here eventually. We usually get the sun later than anybody else anyway. But if we don't take serious steps, then the whole climate of this part of the world is going to change irrevocably.
We do read every week. I read anyway. Climate experts saying that this is serious, and we are heading for serious disaster. But as you say, James, there doesn't seem to be much seriousness about it. Is the Ukraine problem behind that? That people were quite happy to go along a year ago with net zero by 50 or by 2045 in Scotland, but now it's all about get more gas, get more oil. Otherwise, it's going to be very cold this winter. So we're panicked into putting the climate agenda to the bottom of the agenda again. Is that how you see it?
I don't think it's as straightforward as that. I think there's some people have used the Ukraine and the fear of gas shortages as a reason to sort of put net zero behind them. You saw during this ongoing leadership election, which has been going on for longer than Coronation Street, I believe, it's all been about, the balance between net zero and employment or making money, and they seem to be falling down on the wrong side. The most important issue that we face now is clearly the future of the planet. I mean, by the time it changes, I won't be here, but irrevocably, I won't be here, but, my grandkids will be. And I think that we have a responsibility to try and leave the planet in as best condition as we possibly can by the time it's their turn to become something like my age.
Now, that leads us to the story about the Tory leadership race, because you mentioned it's getting a bit like a soap. Well, of course, in any good soap, you have to bump off characters every now and then. So the latest to be bumped off was Kemi Badenoch. But just before we go into the detail, I did read in the National today that climate change was the bottom of the list of priorities among ordinary Conservative members. And that maybe explains why I haven't heard any of the Conservative candidates even talk about it, even during this week of record-breaking temperatures. Well, let's look at the latest. So Kemi Badenoch, as we've said, has the latest to drop out, and another one will drop out tomorrow, leaving two. So Kemi Badenoch has been eliminated from the Conservative leadership race, setting up a battle between Penny Mordaunt, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak in the final round. Mr Sunak, the former Chancellor and the frontrunner, won 118 MPs' votes, just short of the 120 needed to guarantee a spot into the next stage of the process. Ms Badenoch, a former Levelling Up minister, came fourth with 59 votes, exiting the contest to replace Boris Johnson. Ms Mordaunt, who was an international trade minister, won 92 votes from MPs, while Liz Truss, the foreign secretary, won 86. So just to go over those votes again among the Conservative MPs, Rishi Sunak on 118, Kemi Badenoch out with 59 votes, Penny Mordaunt with 92 and Liz Truss with 86. The last MPs vote on Wednesday, that's tomorrow, will decide which two candidates go to the ballot of Conservative Party members, with the final result due on the 5th of September. Whoever wins then becomes Prime Minister automatically. Liz Truss has narrowed the gap on Penny Mordaunt, who appeared to capture the imagination of party members in the early stages of the contest, but has lost momentum in recent days amidst a barrage of hostile briefings against her. Penny Mordaunt was up 10 votes on Tuesday, but Liz Truss's team will hope to win many of Kemi Badenoch's supporters, potentially allowing her to move into second place in Wednesday's ballot. So obviously those 59 votes to Kemi Badenoch will make a serious difference to the second, to who comes second and who comes third. Now, how interested are you in this vote, which none of us, well, hardly anybody in Scotland has a vote in? There might be a couple of dozen Scottish Conservatives who will eventually get on the ballot. But you said it's a soap. We really are just the audience watching it, aren't we?
I mean, that's the only part that we have to play in it. I watched my partner Elaine and I watched the first 45 minutes of the first debate. And at that point, I was nearly joining on watching Emmerdale, but I didn't want to go that far. But it was awful, And as I saw clips of the second debate, and I understand why Liz Truss didn't want to do a third debate, because she is completely soulless and lifeless when she's in front of that camera. Don't know what she's like elsewhere, but the worst two, if we're talking about performances, right? Never mind the politics. If we're talking about performances, for me, the two standouts were, well, Tom Tugendhat had an easy hit, right? I mean, he's never been in a position of power, so he can attack everybody else. Sunak came across as, the most competent, the most confident, and Badenoch, I thought, was very good in terms of performance. She scares the life out of me in terms of politics, but she was very good in terms of performance. I can't see her votes go to Penny Mordaunt, because in the first debate, when she was asked if she trusted the members in the panel, she said that she trusted three of them and didn't know the other one being Penny Mordaunt. And I thought, well, that sends out a message all on its own. So I wouldn't expect a lot of votes to go there, and I expect it will be Truss versus Sunak. And Truss will probably win it, and the country will be in as bad a state as it is just now, because she's got nothing new to say. She's got no policies that she'll be able to bring forward that will benefit the ordinary people of this country. I've got she seems to be there for the sole purpose of being there. I haven't seen her do anything in all her time. She brought forward the deal with New Zealand and Australia, which she was told beforehand was going to be bad for British farmers. Just get it done, because the more important thing for them is to show some results from their Brexit disaster. So that's who we're picking from here. As I said in social media last night, which one's Kaiser Sose? Because none of them are goodies, but I'm sure one of them is worse than the others, and we'll probably find out who that is on the 5th of September. Can I just say one last thing?
Yes, yeah,
If
yeah.
anybody is tailor-made to be Penny Mordaunt's, to be Boris Johnson's replacement, it's Penny Mordaunt, because her previous bosses have said that she's got no eye for detail, she doesn't turn up for her work many times, and she seems to see the job as just being part of her social life, as opposed to a serious position where she should be making life better for the rest of the people in the country. So she sounds like the perfect replacement, but we don't really want a replacement, we want an improvement. So let's hope it's not her, but whoever it is, I fear for the people of Scotland.
Mind you, the incumbent Prime Minister, of course, refused to stand down when he made his fake resignation speech, 3 weeks ago was, because he's still there, because he said government must go on. He has to continue to oversee the government to make sure everything's working smoothly. But unfortunately, never managed to get 2 Cobra meetings into his busy diary last week. But I'm sure
What
he's
he
doing
forgot to
something.
say, of course, Hugh, he forgot to say that business must go on as usual. And business going on as usual for Boris is to go to parties and
Yeah.
go to photo shoots like jumping into a plane. So nothing's
Mhm.
changed here. I am a bit concerned with this, because his
Aye.
behaviour yesterday and the no confidence vote was clearly a very Trumpian sign. You know, that I'll have more to say about this, about what's happened over the last couple of
Yeah,
weeks
that's true.
later on. And that, I think, it's very concerning.
Right. So yeah. So like Mr. Trump, you think we might be hearing from Mr. Johnson again? Anyway, let's move on to the next story, which also concerns the English Conservatives. Boris Johnson has withdrawn the Conservative whip from the Defence Committee chair, Tobias Ellwood, for failing to support the government in that confidence vote which James was just talking about. Mr. Ellwood, who's the MP for Bournemouth East, who had been an outspoken critic of Johnson's conduct during his time as Prime Minister, told the whips he intended to continue with a trip abroad during the no confidence vote. Mr. Ellwood was not eligible to vote in the latest round of Tory party leadership election ballots today. He previously backed Penny Mordaunt, who, as we've seen, came second behind Rishi Sunak and just ahead of Liz Truss. In his statement, Mr. Elwood said he'd been unable to return because of travel issues. He said, following my meeting yesterday with the President of Moldova, I was unable to secure return travel due to unprecedented disruption both here and in the UK. It remained unclear why 11 other Conservative MPs missed the vote without any apparent repercussions. There was no vote recorded for various MPs, including John Barron, Nusrat Ghani, Tom Hunt, and Johnny Mercer, who is the newly appointed Veterans Affairs Minister. It is understood that some of the missing Tory MPs were, like Mr. Ellwood, on trips abroad, but they were given permission to be paired with various opposition MPs. The government, however, won the confidence vote itself by 349 to 238, which is a majority of 111. A highly unusual move. Number 10 called the vote of confidence in itself after it rejected the Labour motion of no confidence. No doubt there's some important element of parliamentary procedure there, James. I don't know. But anyway, the comment today has been that Mr. Elwood has been suspended right away, although he was working, he was doing something that was in his line of business as he's a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. And people have been commenting that the gentleman who was drunk at the Conservative Club in London a few weeks ago.
Mr. Pincher.
Mr. Pincher, thank you. I couldn't remember his name, yeah. And well named. But he's still there. But Tobias Ellwood has been sanctioned because he couldn't get a flight out of Moldova in time. Is this pettiness by Johnson because he's a Johnson critic?
He's a petty, spoiled, small man. And this is behaviour that you'd expect from him. I suspect that people that have known him since he was a teenager, since that went to university with him, that worked with him, would recognise this behaviour. Also, what it does is it knocks out a vote for Penny Mordaunt at a time where she could have a very, very close fight with Liz Truss. So there might be a wee bit of tactics in it, but mostly I think it's spite, just like he did with Michael Gove. To be fair, if you're doing something like that to Michael Gove, nobody's going to complain too much. But this one I think is particularly nasty, given that he was there. What I read today, I don't know if it's true or not, was he was in Moldova to speak about trying to create a through route for grain from the Ukraine. Now, as I say, I'm not sure if that's 100% accurate, but that's what I was told. So he was there in his work as chair of the committee. He should never have been suspended for it. And I can assure you, I'm no supporter of him. But Johnson did it just out of pure badness, which is what his main thing is.
Yes, as we said in the report, he was abroad, but I didn't mean to imply he was on a holiday.
No.
He was
It was clear that he was working. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now let's just move on to the next story, which is we don't usually do what the papers say on Scotland at 7, but this was a big story on the National today, and we're reporting, of course, on the Scottish Government referring to the Supreme Court, the decision on whether Scotland on its own, the Scottish Parliament on its own, has a legal power to call a referendum. So the UK Supreme Court has denied the UK government's request to throw out the Scottish Government's petition for a ruling on whether the Scottish Parliament has the competence to hold an independence referendum without a full hearing. Lord Stewart of Dilton QC, who's the Prime Minister's most senior advisor on Scots law, last week told the court that the request was premature as the First Minister had yet to even introduce the referendum bill to the Scottish Parliament. He wanted the judges in the Supreme Court to make a preliminary ruling to throw out the case without moving to a full hearing about whether the referendum would be lawful. However, in a reply sent to both sides, the court said its judges would consider the issue of whether the request was premature at the same time as examining the substantive issue of whether the consultative referendum on Scottish independence was within the powers of the Scottish Parliament. In deferring that decision, the Supreme Court may well have considered the political and legal consequences which a ruling against the Scottish Government could have on Scotland's status as a so-called equal member of the Voluntary Union of Nations. The court has told the Scottish and the UK governments to submit their legal papers setting out the cases by August 9th. So, James, so all we know now is that the legal submission from the Scottish Government is going to go ahead. So the opening gambit, if you like, by the UK Government has been thrown out. Do you see this as significant? Because the big arguments are still ahead of us.
The big arguments are still ahead, but what they were hoping to do was ensure that the big arguments weren't heard. And the reason why they don't want the big arguments to be heard is that they're scared of the result. Now, I'm not for a second saying that I know or I'm confident that the result will come in our favour. But what I do know is that we need to get that case heard. People need to understand where we're coming from. And the UK government do not want that, because that makes us sound as if we are equal partners. And they do not like the idea even that people see us as equal partners. Because if we're equal partners, why are we even asking permission? We should be able to say, here's the position of the Scottish Parliament. The people have spoken. This is the process we're going to be able to take. The First Minister's played it beautifully here. Get all our ducks in a row before we have the big fight about the substance of it. And I think that once it comes to that, then we'll win the argument. And once we have the referendum, we'll win the referendum.
And of course, the Scottish Government has decided that the date for the referendum will be the 19th of October 2023. Should the Supreme Court, of course, decide that this issue cannot be pursued through the Scottish Parliament alone, then of course the First Minister has made it clear that the next general election will be on independence. There's a possibility, of course, that general election could come this year or even in 2023, because the new Prime Minister might be seeking a mandate. In that case, if that came a bit earlier than Nicola Sturgeon was expecting, do you still think that it would be a single-issue general election?
I believe that the comments have been made that the next general election will be that on that, not on the sole issue, but basically about independence, and I think that's how it's going to be. If it comes before it, then the court case will still go ahead, but we'll have already, whilst that court case is going ahead, we'll have already had permission from the people of Scotland, hopefully, if they vote for us in the appropriate numbers. So, yes, I mean, if there is one, I'm hoping that it is an election on the referendum, because honestly, what else is Westminster for? You know, what we need in terms of Scottish MPs, what we need is to have our voice heard here. Our voice gets heard in Westminster, but nobody pays attention to it. And that's despite all the good work that MPs do down there, our MPs do down there. The only reason why I think we're there is to make sure that we put pressure on them to give us this referendum. And if we don't get it, then I think there's no point in going back.
Mm-hmm. Yes, again, of course, every single one of the Conservative candidates has made it clear that no referendum for Scotland. So that might well come to that. As you said, a general election won't be on a single issue, but that clearly would be top of the manifesto. So let's move on to the economic crisis facing the UK government. Concerns have been raised that thousands of low-income households who had been expecting to receive a £650 government cost of living payment could miss out due to flawed eligibility criteria used for universal credit for people who receive universal credit. The MP for West Dunbartonshire, Martin Docherty Hughes, has hit out at the UK government after his constituent was informed by the DWP that they are ineligible for the cost of living payment despite being in receipt of universal credit. The SNP MP has written to Work and Pensions Secretary Therese Coffey expressing concern that people in employment on low incomes who usually get universal credit are being unfairly denied the cost of living payment because they get paid fortweekly rather than per calendar month. The letter calls on the UK government to urgently review the strict eligibility rules for the cost of living payment, which the MP describes as grossly unfair for people who are paid by their employer on a weekly, fortnightly or fortweekly basis. Those on universal credit who receive a nil award during the assessment period, which was 26th of April this year to the 25th of May this year, as the result of their wage payment schedules, are ineligible for the first £326 instalment of the cost of living payment, which is due to be paid in this month. According to the House of Commons Library, 37% of the UK's 2.3 million working universal credit claimants are on non-monthly pay cycles, suggesting that up to 800,000 low-income individuals could miss out on the additional cost of living payment. Commenting, Martin Docherty Hughes, MP, said, "It's worrying that hundreds of thousands of low-income households who'd expect to receive this cost of living payment could miss out because of the Westminster government's flawed eligibility criteria. Families in West Dunbartonshire and across the country are struggling to pay the UK's cost of living crisis. They're struggling due to the UK's cost of living crisis. They need support now, and it's devastating for my constituent and others who are ordinarily in receipt of universal credit to be unfairly excluded from this much-needed payment. In work, poverty is at its highest level for decades, and now the UK government appears to be penalising people who are paid fortweekly rather than monthly. I urge the Work and Pensions Secretary to act quickly to resolve this before thousands more families are forced needlessly into food banks." James, this seems to be a daft bureaucratic oversight. Do you imagine Therese Coffey, once this is brought to her attention, will urgently act on it?
Yeah, because she's got a history of caring about the little person. When the Tories offer you something, always read the small print, because the headline will be great, the small print will be all except for in the case of, and that's what this is here. It must be the simplest thing to sort of like average it over 12 months and just give the payment to everybody that's entitled to it, not if you get paid 4 weeks or if you get paid monthly. That just seems so ludicrous and unfair. And it's another one of these benefit steps that are there to make a noise, but not to give the money where it's most needed. I mean, who needs it more? I mean, very often people that are paid weekly and fortnightly and monthly are not as the best paid. So they might well be the people who are needing it more than some of those that are going to be getting it. But everybody that's entitled to it should be getting it, and they shouldn't be cut off because of the unfortunate circumstances of how their boss decides to pay them.
Yep, and anomaly a loophole there, so brought to the attention of today's coffee by Martin Doherty Hughes. Now, also on the economy, our next story is about the price rises in people's shopping baskets. Supermarket inflation is expected to reach the highest level since 2008 this August, after rising almost 10% in this month. Families are facing a £454 a year increase in their grocery bills, adding pressure to the cost of living crisis as prices of butter, milk, and pet foods rise at the fastest rates. Inflation of 9.9% in the 4 weeks to the 10th of July, and the soaring sales of ice cream and sun lotion, up 14% and 66%, respectively, underpinned the first rise in overall grocery sales since April last year. The 0.1% rise was driven by Aldi and Lidl, both of which increased their sales by 11%. An additional 1.4 million households visited at least one of those discounters in the latest 3 months, compared with last year, as shoppers sought ways to cut their food bills amid rising prices. According to the four big supermarkets, only Tesco's increased its sales, with Morrison's close to being overtaken by Aldi as the UK's fourth chain. Aldi controls 9.1% of the market against Morrison's 9.4%. As the larger chain's sales fell by 6.7%. So it's all changed in the grocery business, but first of all, massive price increases, as we can see. But it's not only that, it's also that people are having to go shopping. So the thing about food and those other necessities there is that people have to buy them. Prices going up, so people have to divert more of the spending to those. So they must be taking the spending away from something else, or maybe increasing their borrowing. So it is that's how the economic crisis comes down to household level, isn't it?
Well, that's where the important bits are dealt with. I mean, the thing you've got to ask yourself is, why is it that it appears that things are worse here than they are anywhere else? And I mean the UK as opposed to other countries in Europe. The two things that have been blamed are the COVID, the pandemic, which will get blamed for things as long as the Tories are in power, and the war in Ukraine. The one thing that's never blamed is the thing that's really at fault, and that's Brexit. All of this stems from that ridiculous decision in 2016 when everybody said this was going to be the knock on effect. And that's where we've got to now. The other two things are players. I mean, COVID is the pandemic caused so much mayhem, loss of life, and all the other tragedies that went along with it. But Brexit was the thing that made the economic difference, makes these rises in prices so almost inevitable. And of course, lack of choice. Anybody who's been in the supermarket over the last few months has seen empty shelves where foodstuffs used to be, and not just foodstuffs, but other stuffs that have become pretty normal in a shopping basket. So, if there was only some honesty in politics in the Westminster, then they'd be telling us that Brexit has been a failure, that they have to start building relationships with the European Union again, and then hopefully start to work to get these relationships working in a way that the prices might be able to come down again. Because what we're doing is we're putting barriers in the way all the time, and all that's doing is raising prices.
The other interesting thing that's happening is that there's, of course, as we said in the report, a switch towards Aldi, Lidl, and perhaps other low-cost providers of groceries. I noticed it just the other day, in fact, that a huge Tesco's in the east end of Glasgow is closed. One of the superstores is just shut. That's one near Parkhead. Did you know that? So, have you got any, is that something we should be concerned about? Large supermarkets really are in serious trouble.
No, I'll tell you, I am hugely in favour of those who try to help the public being rewarded for it. And I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a business model that they're working to. But if what happens in the process of that is it helps the person in the street to get the message cheaper and give them a wee bit more money to pay for the extortionate heating bills, then, all power to them. And if you can't somewhere like Tesco or any of our major supermarkets, if they can't find a way to cut their costs to help the people, then on their heads be it.
Okay, well, maybe the Conservative candidates would just say, well, that's market forces for you. If you can't keep up the race, you lose. Now, on the economy again, the latest figures from the Office of National Statistics show that regular pay is falling at its fastest rate since 2001. This is real pay. When taking into account inflation, as we said earlier on, is over 9%, which is its highest level for 40 years. Between March and May, pay excluding bonuses was down 2.8% from last year when adjusted for inflation, and that's the fastest drop since figures began. The figures also show that the average pay growth for the private sector was much higher than in the public sector. That's 7.2% pay growth in the private sector compared to 1.5% before taking account of inflation. The data comes as the UK government is set to announce its public sector pay deals. In Scotland, public sector pay on average is rising by 7% higher than the rest of the UK. Commenting, the SNP's Treasury spokesperson, who is Alison Thulis MP, said, as the Tory-made cost of living crisis continues, we are seeing the fastest drop in regular pay since records began, while food, fuel and energy prices continue to soar. Household budgets across Scotland and the UK are being hammered, but the UK government is too busy focusing on the Tory leadership contest to help or care. Inflation is already at its highest level for 40 years and is set to rise further in the autumn. People need help now, not in September or October when the Tories have finally decided who they want to lead their party. And Alison Thulis concluded saying, the Westminster government has made clear where its priorities lie and they don't include the millions of people struggling to make ends meet. Independence offers Scotland a chance to better support households and escape Westminster control and the chaos that comes with it. The interesting thing here to me, James, is that public sector pay is increasing, private sector. So companies do have some room for manoeuvre, can't they? They're facing rising costs, but they can pass that on and ask, as we said before, ask their customers to pay more and then pay the wages that way. But the public sector can't. The public sector has to take what it gets from the Treasury. So there's a squeeze on public sector wages, particularly, isn't there?
Yes, well, exactly. I mean, it's fairly obvious that the public sector, certainly in terms of Scotland, the public sector at every level, including national, lives off a fixed budget. So if we're going to pay more here, we have to take it from somewhere else. Westminster's slightly different because they've got the power to borrow as much as they wish or create money as much as they wish. But if you're trying, I mean, what you want is good people in the public sector, and it becomes harder and harder if what's going to happen is that the wages in the private sector are going to be that much higher than they are in the public sector. So it's going to be a real problem if it continues for a great length of time. Let's just hope that we can get this financial situation under control, that the public sector workers, who, as you say, quite rightly say, are better paid in Scotland than they are the rest of the UK, but they all get the salaries that they're entitled to. We just don't. There's not a magic money tree, and in Scotland we can't just pick it from somewhere. We're taking it from somebody else if we're giving it, if we're paying it out over here.
Yeah, of course. Your sovereign governments, such as the UK, with its own central bank, can of course do certain things with money which you can't do if you're basically Scotland, an economic region of UK. Unless it chooses independence. Now we're going to move on to a Brexit story. James, you've talked about Brexit a couple of times already, and one of the issues of Brexit is about the ability of musicians to tour in Europe. This is something I'm very interested in myself. A cross-party group of MPs and peers has called on the UK government to appoint a touring czar to unravel the red tape facing UK musicians touring Europe. Just before we move on, James, can we have a ban on the use of the word czar from now on, please, in Scotland for anyone who's put in charge of anything? Anyway, the all-party parliamentary group on music say the government must act to tackle the soaring cost of obtaining visas and transporting instruments which bands have faced since Brexit, with some orchestras facing additional cost of £5,000 every time they travel abroad. The APPG, the All Parliamentary Group on Music, said that industry faced a crisis which requires urgent action. Pete Wishart MP, who of course toured with the world-renowned band Runrig, criticised the UK government for treating performers like pawns on a chessboard during the Brexit negotiations. And Pete Wishart said, having travelled across Europe with Runrig, I know firsthand how expensive it could have been if it wasn't for freedom of movement as a result of being part of the EU. As outlined in this report, the scrapping of touring visas post-Brexit has created higher costs, more complications, and fewer opportunities for musicians. And now, with Labour joining the Tories and declaring that there's no way back into the European Union, it has left Scotland with only one alternative. By choosing independence, Scotland can rejoin our European allies within the EU and protect our wonderful and talented musicians in the future. Now, this is an issue that the Musicians Union, which I'm a member of, has been talking about for 4 years, at least, before Brexit. The European Union was saying, hey, wait a minute, have you looked at this? This is going to make it really difficult for bands to do Europe. Young bands often go on a trip to Europe, used to. It was just part of the process, of getting your stage act together. And it was used to be a relatively easy thing to do, and now it's becoming an extremely difficult thing to do. So, but this is an all-parliamentary group. I believe Pete Wishart actually jams with some musicians across different parties down there, but the government's not listening, are they?
Yeah, they've got a group, I can't remember the name of it, but from 4 different parties, I think. No, the government don't listen to anybody. They don't want to be seen to be having any connection with Europe, making life easier for people to travel in Europe. It's really interesting because as a huge Beatles fan, if this had been in place, then I doubt we'd have the Beatles because their formative years were spent in Hamburg and made them the band that they ended up being. But on a more serious level, it's not just the fact that we have all these restrictions on them now and costs on them now. The way that air transport is, you're never sure you're going to be able to get to the place. So a lot of bands will not be willing to pay the costs that they're now being asked to pay, and then find that they can't get over there because flights have been cancelled or there's a big queue at Dover or whatever. So there's all these other examples of not being able to travel as easily as you could. So maybe a spokesman, not as for travelling bands, etc., could be put in place. It certainly is an idea that's well worthwhile. And I'm not going to be standing again in 4 years, so if it's still on there, I quite fancy touring Europe with some of these bands if they're looking for somebody.
Yeah. Pick up the bass. That's my advice. That's the easiest one. Right? You can come around here and have a jam, James, if you've got some time later on. But certainly it is very difficult for touring musicians. The MU, Musicians Union, has been lobbying in Parliament. That's why I asked, are you listening? Because I know that the Musicians Union has got several MPs, quite a lot of MPs together, and have explained the problems. And they were doing this years ago, but it just doesn't seem to be getting through. But that's not a Brexit benefit I don't remember putting on the side of the bus.
Exactly. It's never ending. The list is never ending. There's every problem. Nothing was thought through. It was built on a slogan, and the people of the UK have been suffering ever since. Some of them don't realise they're suffering and think the fact that they can put a Union Jack and everything compensates for the fact that their family are not going to be able to heat their homes during the winter months and not be able to afford to buy food. But still,
it's a crisis all round. Now let's move talking about energy. Actually, our next story is about the people who
obviously the customers in France are benefiting from that. Over here, everything is done not for the benefit of the people, but for the benefit of the shareholders and for the benefit of those who keep their money somewhere else. Become the leader of the ERG or get his own group behind him and become a militant within the Tory party, but without the principles that Militant had at that time.
Nonsense.
What he said was that if there's a big issue coming up, what I do is I just create another big issue so that they just stop that one, give us time to deal with it while they're dealing with the latest thing that we've done. So that's what he does. It's deflection all the time. And he hopes that the media and by the way, let me just say that in the main, I think we're very poorly served by our media. I think that the BBC have been shameful over the last 10 years or so, and but he hopes that their short attention span and the people's short attention span will let the things that he's been done for just drift into the past, and then he deals with the next thing when it comes, and the next thing when it comes. When's he ever given us a long-term commitment that he stood by? It's day to day with Johnson, and it's almost like sentence to sentence as far as I'm concerned.
So that's our final story tonight then on Steve Bannon continuing to refuse to attend the congressional hearings into the attack on the Capitol in January last year, and so a criminal for not turning up. Okay, so that's about it for tonight. So can I thank James Dornan, MSP for Cathcart, and my MSP actually, so it's very good to have you on the show, especially James. Thanks, it's been grand talking to you here. And as James said, there is severe criticism in Scotland for the way we are served by our media, because really basically all of the media in Scotland, whether it's print or broadcast, is not really controlled in Scotland at all. So that's really why we and my team of volunteers are putting out Scotland at 7, 5 nights a week, and also the full Scottish, our lunchtime show on Sunday, because we think there is a need for news which is reported from the Scottish point of view and not being filtered through somebody else's point of view. So thank you for raising that point, James. But on the subject, can I just remind you, or to inform you if you haven't heard before, that we are supported by our subscribers, by the people who have looked at our website, and you can see the link down below of our supporters. We ask you to simply go on there and click on the e-form. And if you can start with a direct debit, even at £5 a month, which hundreds of people have done, that's what's keeping us on the air. So we don't have any other sources of funding. So thank you to the supporters, and I urge you to do that if you can manage for a month. These days, we've paid. So that's it from Scotland at 7 tonight. So I'm Hugh Stewart. Thank you for watching, and thank you to James Dornan for joining us along the road there. And I'll be back at Scotland at 7 tomorrow. Good night, James. Thanks. Bye.
Good night.